My name is Liz Brueggemann, and I'm an agent with Auburn Agency Crop Insurance in Auburn, Nebraska. I want to talk today about wind and hail coverage. We are well aware that the farmers in the last few years have been inundated with private and expensive add-on products. We believe wind and hail coverage is one of the best add-ons that is effective in protecting your shallow losses and is directly related to events and performance of your farm. We're going to go over the most common and effective policy structures and discuss additional and lesser known perils that crop hail policies cover. First, let's get to the basics of the type of wind and hail coverage I want to go over. As an agency, we found this policy to be the most effective. We refer to it as a basic companion to policy. We like this policy type because it is extremely simple. There are only two factors in determining loss payments: the percent of damage assessed and the dollars of coverage chosen by the farmer. For both wind and hail perils, there is a 0% deductible. For the first 10% of damage, the policy pays the farmer 1 for 1. For example, on a policy with $100 of coverage, 5% of damage would equal $5 in indemnity, or $400 of coverage would equal $20 per acre in indemnity. Once damage exceeds 10%, there is an increasing payment factor. 20% of hail damage would then pay $30 per acre on a policy with $100 of coverage, or $120 per acre on a policy with $400 of coverage. If damage were to exceed 55%, the policy will pay out 100% of guaranteed dollars per acre on your wind and hail policy. How many of us even knew the word derecho before last year? What we now know, it's a massive wind event that can last for hours. Anyone who had been on this policy last year would have received 100% indemnity after 55% damage. Another thing we like about this policy type is that damage is also assessed on a per acre basis. Damage is not spread or averaged across the field or unit. If 5 acres have 5% damage and another 10 acres have 20%, the 5 acres are paid at 5% and the 10 acres are paid at 20%. Here are the expiration dates for wind and hail coverage. For corn, hail coverage expires on November 15th and wind coverage expires on November 1st. Soybean hail coverage expires on November 1st. Now, I want to talk about some other perils that wind and hail policies cover that don't get a lot of attention but can still cause a lot of worries and are expensive if they were to happen. First is fire and lightning. Our agency saw a handful of fire instances this harvest. Luckily, everyone had a wind and hail policy and were paid for their losses. Crops that are still in the field before harvest, as well as in the harvester, are covered in cases of loss due to fire or lightning. However, crops are not covered if they had been planted into a cover crop or a current year stubble or residue. This is more of an issue if you are in an area that has a lot of double cropping. There is an additional endorsement that can be purchased if this were to apply to you. So, if your field were to catch fire, every acre destroyed would then be considered and paid as a total loss. The biggest concern for fire we've seen is usually around harvest when the humidity is low, wind is high, and conditions are dry. Another peril, transit coverage. I remember going over this topic when I was in training to take my crop insurance exam for my license. The teacher said I would probably never see this in my career. My dad owns a wrecker company, and we've seen firsthand full grain trucks collapse a bridge and lose thousands of pounds of grain into creeks. We've also seen grain trucks tipped and rolled, leaving the grain unsalvageable on the side of the road. The grain that is in transit to the first place of storage within 100 miles is covered in the event of loss due to overturn, collision, collapse of bridges, culverts, and docks, windstorm, and fire and lightning. All the ugly things that could happen to you in transit. It happens, and it happens more often than most people realize. The way this loss is assessed, the adjuster works out how many bushels were in the carrier, takes the production of the field to figure out how many acres harvested the lost bushels would equate. Then the lost acres would be paid in full dollars of coverage. Lastly, vandalism and malicious mischief. Losses to growing and stored crops caused by vandalism and malicious mischief are covered if there is $100 or more in damage per occurrence. For example, if someone were to steal your grain truck, go for a joyride, and wreck, the contents would be covered similarly to transit coverage. Found that someone's opened the door to your grain bin and spilt grain everywhere? That grain would also be covered. Or say an uninsured driver would tear through your field before harvest. The lost crop would also be covered as a total loss. However, if the driver has property and casualty insurance, their insurance would cover the lost grain. Fire and lightning coverage expires for soybeans on November 15th, while the same for corn expires on December 15th. Since a lot of these perils haven't been discussed much before, it may bring up some questions specific to your operation and concern. Please reach out to our office with any questions. We would love to run any sort of scenario through our claims department or get further into the weeds on how these perils are adjusted. At the end of the day and at the end of harvest, we at Auburn Agency want you to get the most out of the policies you purchase.